March 15, 1944, 11:47 a.m., Camp Ruston, Louisiana. Corporal Isaac Woodard Jr. stood outside Malone's diner, watching something that would break him in ways enemy fire never could. Through the window he saw them, 6 German prisoners of war, still in their Wehrmacht-modified uniforms with PW stenciled on the back, laughing over plates of fried chicken and sweet tea, the same restaurant that had turned him away 3 minutes earlier. "We don't serve coloreds," the waitress had said, not even looking up from her order pad. Woodard wore the uniform of the United States Army. The bronze star pinned to his chest came from actions at Anzio, where he'd pulled 2 wounded men through 200 yards of machine gun fire. The Germans inside had tried to kill Americans. They ate. He starved. Before we continue with Isaac Woodard's story and the thousands like him, we need your help to keep these uncomfortable truths alive. If you're already feeling the weight of what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who need to understand real history, not the sanitized version. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of the injustices and ironies that shaped World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Atlanta to Amsterdam, from Tokyo to Toronto. Did your family experience segregation? Do you have stories that never made it into textbooks? We want to hear from you. Now back to Louisiana, March 1944, where Isaac Woodard was about to make a decision that would define the rest of his life. Isaac Woodard was born in Winsboro, South Carolina, in 1919, the 4th of 7 children. His father worked the same cotton fields his grandfather had worked as a slave. Isaac stood 5'11", which was tall for a black man in South Carolina, and that height had caused him trouble since he was 12. White men didn't like black boys who looked them in the eye. He'd joined the army in October 1942, thinking, like thousands of other black men, that military service might earn them something resembling respect. The recruiting sergeant in Columbia had promised him that in the army a man was judged by his performance, not his skin. That was lie number 1. Fort Benning, Georgia, January 1943. The base where Isaac did his infantry training had everything separated. Black barracks on the east side, across a drainage ditch that flooded every time it rained. White barracks on the west side, with concrete walkways and working heat. 2 mess halls, 2 chapels, 2 everything, except the obstacle course. Everyone ran the same obstacle course. Isaac ran it faster than 90% of the white recruits. He qualified expert marksman with the M1 Garand on his first attempt. He could disassemble and reassemble a Browning .30 caliber machine gun in 2 minutes, 12 seconds, faster than his drill instructor. None of it mattered. His best friend from basic training was a kid named James Stevenson from Birmingham, Alabama. Stevenson was 19, barely shaved, talked constantly about opening a barbecue restaurant when the war ended. "Stevenson's Smokehouse," he'd say. "Best ribs from Atlanta to Memphis. You'll be my partner, Isaac. 50-50, we'll serve everybody. Black, white, don't matter. Good food don't know color." They shipped out to Italy together in July 1943. The 92nd Infantry Division, an all-black combat unit with white officers. The officers ate in different tents, slept in different quarters. But when the German 88 started falling, everybody bled the same color. Anzio, February 22, 1944. The beachhead was chaos. German artillery had the entire landing zone targeted. Shells fell every 17 seconds. Someone had timed it. Isaac's squad was pinned behind a destroyed Sherman tank when he heard Stevenson screaming. Shrapnel had torn through Stevenson's left leg below the knee. The medic was 200 yards back, too far. The Germans had machine guns covering every approach. Isaac went anyway. He low-crawled through mud and blood, and pieces of men he'd eaten breakfast with. German bullets snapped past close enough to feel the air move. He reached Stevenson, applied a tourniquet with shaking hands, then dragged him back toward the American lines. Halfway there, another soldier, white kid from Ohio named Patterson, got hit in the shoulder. Isaac grabbed him too, pulled both men the remaining 100 yards, while a German MG-42 chewed up the ground around him. Patterson survived. Stevenson didn't. He died in the aid station 20 minutes later, still talking about his restaurant, about ribs and Brunswick stew, and how they'd make it work. Isaac held his hand until it went cold. The Bronze Star citation said Isaac had distinguished himself by heroic action in the face of enemy fire, saving the life of a fellow soldier. It didn't mention that Patterson was white. It didn't mention that the Army hospital put Patterson in the main ward with white soldiers, while Stevenson bled out in the segregated colored section with one overworked doctor for 40 wounded men. It didn't mention that Patterson got his morphine immediately. Stevenson waited 45 minutes screaming. Back in the States on leave, March 1944, Isaac thought maybe the uniform would mean something. The ribbons on his chest, the combat badge, the proof that he'd fought for America. Camp Ruston had 4 Iso-Zerad German POWs, men captured in North Africa and Sicily, men who'd worn swastikas, men who'd shot at American soldiers. The Geneva Convention required that POWs be treated humanely. It said they should receive the same rations as American troops. It said they should have access to recreation, education, reasonable living conditions. The U.S. military followed these rules meticulously for the Germans. At Camp Ruston, German prisoners worked in the camp's woodshop, built furniture, played soccer on groomed fields. They attended English classes taught by civilian teachers. They formed orchestras and theatrical groups. They received mail from home through the International Red Cross, and when their work details took them into nearby towns, they could eat in any restaurant, because they were white. Isaac Wood had learned this the hard way at Malone's Diner. He'd been in town for 3 hours trying to find somewhere to eat. The base mess hall was closed for repairs. He'd walked past 6 restaurants. All of them had signs, whites only, or no colored, or just a look from the owner that said everything without words. Then he'd seen Malone's, clean windows, good smells. And through those windows, German POWs eating lunch, guarded by a single MP who was also eating. Isaac thought maybe, just maybe, if enemy soldiers could eat there, an American soldier could too. "We don't serve coloreds." The waitress was maybe 40, tired eyes, graying hair pulled back. She didn't sound mean, just matter of fact, stating reality like she'd state the daily special. "Ma'am," Isaac said, keeping his voice level, "those are German prisoners in there. I know what they are. They fought against America. I fought for America. Don't matter. We serve whites. They're white. That's the rule." Behind her, one of the Germans caught Isaac's eye. The man was maybe 25, Luftwaffe by the insignia still visible on his modified uniform. He'd probably bombed American positions, maybe killed American soldiers. The German raised his glass of sweet tea, smiled, took a long drink. Isaac felt something crack inside his chest, not anger, worse than anger, understanding. He understood finally, completely, what America actually was. The MP at the corner table, a corporal from Mississippi, watched the whole exchange. He didn't say anything, didn't defend Isaac's right to eat, didn't suggest maybe there was something wrong with enemy soldiers getting better treatment than American ones. He just went back to his apple pie. Isaac walked out, stood on the sidewalk in the March heat. His Bronze Star suddenly felt heavy, like it might drag him through the pavement into the Louisiana mud. What Isaac didn't know was that this exact scene was happening in hundreds of towns across America. In Texas, German POWs from Camp Hearn regularly ate at local restaurants, while black soldiers from nearby Camp Hood couldn't get served. In Florida, German POWs from Camp Blanding went to movies in Jacksonville, sitting in the whites-only section, while black American soldiers had to sit in the balcony marked colored. In Mississippi, German POWs worked alongside white civilians in factories and farms, eating lunch together, while black workers had to eat outside regardless of weather. The U.S. military had 425 Iso-Zerad German POWs in camps across America by 1945. The Geneva Convention required they be treated well. The Jim Crow laws required they be treated as white. American military regulations didn't override state segregation laws. So the absurd mathematics of American racism played out. Enemy plus white, better than ally plus black. Lloyd Brown, a black soldier stationed at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, wrote about it in his journal. "We are told we are fighting for freedom. We are told we are fighting against tyranny and hatred. Then we come home and watch the men who wanted to destroy America eat hot meals while we're told to go around back to the colored entrance where the food is different and the dignity is absent. The 92nd Infantry Division, Isaac's unit, had a mortality rate of 8%. They took casualties at Anzio, at Gothic Line, at the Po Valley Offensive. They earned 12 Zielreserven decorations, including 2 Medals of Honor, 65 Silver Stars, and 162 Bronze Stars. Black soldiers made up 10% of the army, but 25% of labor and service battalions. They loaded ammunition under fire, they drove trucks through minefields, they built bridges under artillery bombardment. And they came home to restaurants that welcomed their enemies but not them. Isaac tried to tell people about it, wrote letters to the NAACP, to his congressmen, to newspapers. Most never responded. The few that did said basically the same thing. We understand your frustration, but wartime is not the time to challenge segregation. National unity requires patience. National unity. While German POWs ate fried chicken in Louisiana diners, the breaking point came in February 1946. The war was over. Isaac was being discharged. He was on a Greyhound bus from Georgia back to South Carolina, still in uniform, still wearing his decorations. The bus stopped in Batesburg, South Carolina. Isaac went to use the restroom at the station. The white restroom, because the colored restroom was out of order. The police chief, Linwood Shull, didn't ask questions. He didn't care about the uniform or the medals. He took out his nightstick and beat Isaac Woodard so severely he was permanently blinded in both eyes. The assault took 3 minutes. Shull later said Isaac had been disorderly and drunk. Isaac hadn't had a drink in 4 days. Multiple witnesses said he'd been polite and quiet. The case went to trial. All-white jury. Deliberation lasted 30 minutes. Not guilty. Shull walked free. Isaac was 27 years old and completely blind for the rest of his life. The Woodard case became national news, helped inspire President Truman to desegregate the military in 1948. But that didn't help Isaac. That didn't give him back his eyes. Meanwhile, the German POWs went home. Most of them returned to Germany in 1946, repatriated to help rebuild their destroyed country. Many of them wrote later about their time in American camps, talking about how well they'd been treated, how American guards had been fair, how American civilians had been friendly. Some of them wrote about eating in American restaurants, about apple pie and hamburgers and coffee. They wrote about it as proof that Americans were good people, hospitable people. None of them mentioned never seeing a black American soldier in those same restaurants. Isaac Woodard spent the next 47 years blind. The Army gave him a disability pension, $331 per month. The VA provided him with a white cane and some basic training in how to navigate without sight. No one gave him back his dignity. He married in 1948. His wife, Rosa, described him to their children as a man who'd been broken by the country he'd tried to serve. He rarely talked about the war. When he didn't talk about combat or medals or bravery. He talked about standing outside Malone's diner, watching German prisoners eat while he went hungry. "That's when I knew," he'd say. "That's when I understood what we actually were fighting for, and who that we included." The restaurant changed hands several times over the years, eventually became a Piggly Wiggly, then a vacant lot. Nobody put up a marker about what happened there in March 1944. No plaque explaining that enemy soldiers once ate where American soldiers couldn't. Isaac died in 1992 at age 73. His obituary in the Columbia newspaper was 6 lines. It mentioned his Bronze Star. It mentioned his blinding in 1946. It did not mention Malone's diner. It did not mention the German POWs. His funeral had 47 attendees. The VA sent a representative who presented the flag to his widow. The representative was young, maybe 25, and when he said, "On behalf of a grateful nation," Isaac's son started laughing, not happy laughing, the other kind. In 1997, a historian from the University of South Carolina named Linda Woodard, no relation, was researching the treatment of German POWs in America. She found references to the Camp Ruston prisoners being taken to local restaurants. She found letters from German POWs mentioning good American food in Louisiana towns. Then she found Isaac's letters to the NAACP. found his description of watching the Germans eat while being turned away. She spent 2 years tracking down every detail, found the waitress, still alive at 93, living in a nursing home. The woman remembered that day. "It bothered me," she said, "but rules were rules. If I'd served him, I'd have lost my job, maybe worse." She never apologized. Linda Woodard published her findings in a book called The Irony of Segregation: German POWs and Black Soldiers in World War II America. The book won academic awards, sold 3,000 copies, mostly to university libraries. Isaac's family received a complimentary copy. They never opened it. In 2019, the Army made Isaac Woodard's story part of its official history education, teaching it to officer candidates as an example of institutional injustice. In 2022, 30 years after his death, Isaac received a formal apology from the Secretary of the Army. His children, all in their 70s by then, said it was nice but meaningless. "They're apologizing to a ghost," Isaac's daughter said. "They couldn't apologize when it mattered, when he could still see, when he still believed America might care." Today, there's a small display about Isaac Woodard at the South Carolina State Museum. It mentions his Bronze Star, his blinding, his fight for civil rights. It does not mention Malone's Diner, does not mention the German POWs eating fried chicken while he stood hungry in the March heat. That detail apparently isn't important enough for the display. The story of German POWs receiving better treatment than Black American soldiers isn't unique to Isaac Woodard. It happened thousands of times, in hundreds of towns, throughout the war. It was policy, practice, and proof of exactly who America valued and who it didn't. The Germans who ate in those restaurants went home and rebuilt their country. Many became successful. Some probably told their grandchildren about the kind Americans who treated them well during the war. The black soldiers who couldn't eat in those same restaurants came home to continued segregation, discrimination, and violence. Many were denied GI Bill benefits that white soldiers received automatically. Their service earned them few opportunities and less respect. Isaac Woodard stood outside Malone's Diner for 7 minutes that March day in 1944. Then he walked away, went back to base hungry, wrote in his diary that night, "I don't know what I'm fighting for anymore. I thought it was freedom. But freedom seems to be for some people and not others. Even our enemies get it before we do." He was 24 years old when he wrote that. He had 2 more years before a police chief would beat him blind. A lifetime ahead of darkness, all because he'd believed the uniform might matter, that the medals might count for something, that serving his country might earn him the right to eat in a restaurant, the right to be seen as human, the right that German prisoners of war, his enemies, received without question. If this story moved you, if it made you angry or sad or uncomfortable, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel to hear more stories about the realities of World War II that don't make it into most history books. The truths that are harder to accept, but more important to remember. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if your family experienced segregation or injustice during this era. These stories matter because they remind us that fighting for your country doesn't always mean your country will fight for you. Thank you for keeping Isaac Woodard's memory alive. Thank you for listening to an uncomfortable truth. And remember, the past shapes the present. We can't fix what we won't face. This is history. This happened. This was America. And America has never apologized enough. July 8, 1945. 2:15 p.m., Salina, Kansas. Sergeant Lloyd Brown walked into the train station lunch counter with 5 other black soldiers. They'd been traveling for 16 hours straight from their base in Arizona to their new assignment in Michigan. The war in Europe was over. Japan was weeks from surrender. They were hungry, exhausted, and still wearing the uniform of the United States Army. The waitress looked up from wiping the counter. Her face hardened. "You boys need to leave." Behind them, through the door they'd just entered, came 6 German prisoners of war with 2 guards. The Germans wore their modified uniforms with the painted PW letters. They'd been working at a nearby farm, harvesting wheat under the summer sun. Lloyd Brown watched what happened next with a clarity that would haunt him for 50 years. The waitress smiled at the Germans. "Y'all come on in. Sit anywhere you like." The German POWs sat at the counter, the exact counter where Lloyd and his men had just been told to leave. One of the guards, a corporal from Oklahoma, ordered 7 coffees, 7 hamburgers, 7 slices of pie. The waitress brought the food within minutes. Hot, fresh, served with a smile. Lloyd Brown stood there for 37 seconds. He counted them. Each second felt like an hour. Then he walked out. His men followed. Nobody said anything because what was there to say? What words existed to explain watching your enemies eat while you starved? Outside, in the July heat, Private James Baldwin from Detroit started crying. He was 19 years old. He'd lied about his age to enlist at 17. He'd believed everything the recruiting posters promised about fighting for freedom and democracy. "I can't do this anymore," Baldwin said. "I can't keep pretending this makes sense." Lloyd Brown was 26. He'd been in the Army since 1942. He'd served in the Quartermaster Corps, loading ammunition at ports in England and France. He'd been at Utah Beach on D-Day +3, hauling supplies across corpse-littered sand while German artillery still fell randomly. He'd seen men die. He'd seen horror. But nothing broke him like watching German prisoners eat hamburgers while American soldiers went hungry. The story should have ended there, but it didn't. Because Lloyd Brown did something that changed his life and nearly cost him everything. He wrote about it. Not in a diary, not in a private letter. He wrote an article for a magazine called March On, a publication by the March on Washington movement, a civil rights organization. The article was titled, "Why I Refuse to Fight." In it, Lloyd Brown described the Selena incident in detail. He described the waitress's smile for the German POWs. He described Private Baldwin crying. He described the absolute absurdity of fighting for a country that valued your enemies more than you. Then he wrote this: "I am a soldier in the United States Army. I have worn this uniform for 3 years. I have followed orders, done my duty, and served honorably. But I will not serve a country that treats its enemies better than its soldiers. I will not fight for a nation that considers my skin more threatening than a Nazi uniform. If this is the America we are defending, then I refuse to defend it." The article published in August 1945, 3 days after Japan surrendered. The Army arrested Lloyd Brown on August 19, 1945. The charge was sedition, attempting to cause insubordination and disloyalty in the military. The prosecutor argued that Brown's article encouraged other black soldiers to refuse service, thereby weakening military readiness and national security. Never mind that the war was over. Never mind that Brown had served faithfully for 3 years. Never mind that everything he wrote was factually true. He'd embarrassed the Army. He'd made America look bad. That was the real crime. The court-martial took place at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, in October 1945. The military courtroom was segregated, white officers on one side, black soldiers in the gallery on the other. The 5 judges were all white. The prosecutor was white. Brown's defense attorney was Captain Marcus Ray, one of only 57 black officers in the entire Judge Advocate General's Corps. Captain Ray knew they couldn't win. The military had too much invested in maintaining the segregation system. Brown's article had exposed that system too clearly, too publicly. The Army needed to make an example. But Ray fought anyway. He called the waitress from Selena as a witness. She testified that yes, she'd refused service to black soldiers while serving German POWs. When asked why, she said, "State law requires segregation. The Germans were white. That's all there is to it." Ray asked if she understood that the Germans had fought against America. She said yes. Ray asked if she understood the black soldiers had fought for America. She said yes. "And it didn't matter?" Ray asked. "No, sir," she said. "White is white. Colored is colored. That's how it is." Ray called 12 other witnesses, black soldiers who'd experienced similar treatment at restaurants, hotels, buses, and trains across America, men who'd earned Bronze Stars and Purple Hearts, men who'd stormed beaches and liberated concentration camps. All of them had been turned away from establishments that welcomed German POWs. The prosecutor objected to every witness, claiming their testimony was irrelevant to the charge of sedition. The judges agreed. They struck most of the testimony from the record. The trial lasted 4 days. The judges deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty. Sentence: 5 years in military prison, dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and benefits. For writing the truth. Lloyd Brown served 18 months at Fort Leavenworth before civil rights organizations and sympathetic congressmen pressured the Army into reducing his sentence. He was released in March 1947 with a dishonorable discharge that would follow him for the rest of his life. He couldn't get a government job, couldn't get VA benefits, couldn't use the GI Bill to go to college or buy a house. The dishonorable discharge marked him as undesirable, untrustworthy, un-American, all because he'd written about German POWs eating while black soldiers couldn't. What Lloyd Brown didn't know during his court-martial was how widespread the problem actually was. The Army's own internal reports, classified until 1991, documented 1,847 separate incidents between 1942 and 1945 where German POWs received better treatment than black American soldiers. The incidents included German POWs attending movies in white-only theaters, while black soldiers had to use colored entrances. German POWs swimming in municipal pools closed to black soldiers. German POWs staying in hotels that refused black soldiers. German POWs riding in whites-only train cars, while black soldiers rode in Jim Crow cars. German POWs using white restrooms and water fountains marked whites-only German POWs. Shopping in stores that required black soldiers to enter through back doors the Army knew. They documented it. They did nothing to stop it, because fixing it would have required confronting segregation, and confronting segregation would have required admitting that the system was unjust, and admitting injustice would have undermined the war narrative that America was fighting for freedom and democracy. So they let it continue. They let German prisoners, men who'd worn swastikas, who'd fought for Hitler, who'd participated in a regime dedicated to racial superiority, receive better treatment than loyal American soldiers whose only crime was being black. The mathematical absurdity of it, enemy plus white, more valuable than ally plus black. Private James Baldwin, the 19-year-old who'd cried outside the Salina lunch counter, never recovered from that moment. He finished his service in 1946, went home to Detroit, and descended into alcoholism. His family said the war hadn't broken him. America had. Baldwin died in 1959 at age 33. Cirrhosis of the liver. His sister found a letter in his belongings addressed to the VA requesting help for what we'd now call PTSD. The letter was dated 1953. It had never been sent. In it, Baldwin wrote, "The war didn't give me nightmares, but I dream about Salina every night. I dream about standing outside that lunch counter watching Germans eat. In the dream, I'm still wearing my uniform, still hungry, still invisible. And I wake up knowing that's exactly how America sees me, invisible until I'm inconvenient." The VA letter would have been denied anyway. Psychological benefits for black veterans were almost impossible to obtain. The VA hospitals were segregated, understaffed in the colored wards, and operated on the assumption that black soldiers were less susceptible to psychological trauma than white soldiers. That assumption killed James Baldwin as surely as a German bullet would have. Lloyd Brown, after his release from prison, tried to build a normal life. He moved to New York City, worked in factories, drove cabs, took whatever jobs would hire a man with a dishonorable discharge. He married in 1949. His wife, Dorothy, worked as a seamstress. They had 3 children. Lloyd never talked about the war with them, never mentioned his court-martial. His children grew up thinking their father had simply worked in factories his whole life. It wasn't until 1995, after Dorothy died, that Lloyd finally told his children the truth. His daughter, Patricia, was 44 years old when she learned her father had been a soldier. She was 44 when she learned he'd been court-martialed for writing the truth. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. "Because I was ashamed," Lloyd said, "not of what I wrote, but that I served a country that would punish me for writing it, that I'd been naive enough to believe the uniform would protect me, that I'd thought fighting for America might make America fight for me." Patricia Brown spent the next 8 years working to get her father's discharge upgraded. She wrote letters to congressmen, senators, the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of Defense. She hired lawyers. She filed petitions. In 2003, 58 years after Lloyd Brown's court-martial, the Army Board for Correction of Military Records reviewed his case. They acknowledged that his article had been factually accurate. They acknowledged that his treatment had been unjust. They acknowledged that segregation had been official Army policy, and therefore Brown's complaints were legitimate. They denied his appeal. The reason? Sergeant Brown's article, while factually accurate, was detrimental to military morale and discipline during wartime. The court-martial was conducted according to regulations in effect at the time. The Army cannot retroactively change decisions made under historical legal frameworks, even when those frameworks are now recognized as unjust. Lloyd Brown was 84 years old when he received that decision. He died 6 months later, in January 2004, still dishonorably discharged, still without benefits, still marked by the country he'd served as unworthy. His funeral had 23 attendees. No military honors, no flag presentation, no recognition of service. Because according to the official record, Lloyd Brown had never honorably served his country. The lunch counter in Salina, Kansas, closed in 1968. The building became a hardware store, then a used bookshop, then stood vacant for 20 years. In 2015, a developer bought it and converted it into apartments. Nobody living there knows what happened in 1945. There's no marker, no plaque, no acknowledgement that 6 black soldiers were once refused service while their enemies ate. The local historical society has a small exhibit about German POWs working Kansas farms during World War II. The exhibit describes them as well treated and notes that many Germans formed lasting friendships with American farmers and townspeople. It does not mention Lloyd Brown, does not mention the lunch counter, does not mention any black soldiers at all. In 2018, a graduate student from the University of Kansas named Thomas Mitchell was researching his thesis on German POWs in the Midwest. He stumbled across Lloyd Brown's March On article in a digital archive. The article led him to the court-martial records, which led him to the Army's classified reports about segregation and POW treatment. Mitchell spent 2 years reconstructing the full story. He found Patricia Brown, Lloyd's daughter, living in Brooklyn. She was 67, working as a retired teacher. She gave him her father's letters, his journals, his discharge papers. Mitchell published his findings in the Journal of Military History in 2020. The article was titled The Salina Incident, German POWs, Black Soldiers, and the Limits of American Democracy in World War II. The article won academic awards. It was assigned reading in 14 university courses. It was cited 83 times in other academic papers. Lloyd Brown's family never received any compensation, no apology, no correction of his military record, just 14 pages in an academic journal that 97% of Americans would never read. The German POWs from Camp Phillips, the camp that supplied the prisoners who ate at the Salina lunch counter, all returned to Germany between 1946 and 1947. Many of them later wrote memoirs about their time in America. One of them, a former Luftwaffe pilot named Klaus Weber, published a book in 1989 called Meine Zeit in America, My Time in America. In it, he describes working on Kansas farms, learning English, eating American food. He writes, "The Americans treated us very well, better than we deserved as prisoners. They were kind people, generous people. They showed us that democracy and human dignity were not just words but real values. This experience changed my life and made me believe in reconciliation between our nations." The book never mentions seeing black soldiers, never mentions segregation, never mentions that the human dignity he experienced was built on a system that denied that same dignity to millions of Americans. Maybe Weber never noticed. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he convinced himself that what he saw didn't matter because it wasn't his problem. Or maybe he knew exactly what was happening and simply chose not to include it in his memoir because it would have complicated the narrative of American generosity and democratic values. Either way, his silence became part of the historical record. His version of events, Germans treated well by kind Americans, became the story people remembered. while Lloyd Brown's version, The Truth, got him court-martialed and erased. Today, there are hundreds of books about German POWs in America. They describe the camps, the work programs, the recreational activities, the generally humane treatment. Many of these books note how well the Geneva Convention was followed, how seriously America took its obligations to treat prisoners with dignity. Very few of these books mention that America treated enemy prisoners better than its own black soldiers. Very few mention the lunch counters, the restaurants, the hotels, the buses, the water fountains. Very few mention Lloyd Brown, or Isaac Woodard, or James Baldwin, or the thousands of black soldiers who served their country and received contempt in return. Because that part of the story is uncomfortable, it complicates the narrative of the good war. It forces us to confront the reality that America fought against Nazi racial ideology while enforcing its own racial hierarchy. It forces us to admit that the greatest generation had a blind spot the size of the entire Jim Crow South. Lloyd Brown understood this. In one of his final interviews, conducted by his daughter in 2003, he said, "People ask me if I'm bitter. I tell them no, I'm not bitter, I'm sad. I'm sad that my country couldn't see us as human until decades after we died. I'm sad that German soldiers got more respect than we did. I'm sad that nobody wanted to hear the truth when I wrote it. But bitter, no. Bitterness requires surprise, and I was never surprised. I always knew exactly what America was." He died 6 months later. His dishonorable discharge was never changed. His name appears on no memorials. His story is taught in no high school history classes. But it happened. Every word of it is true. And the fact that we don't teach it, don't remember it, don't acknowledge it, tells you everything you need to know about which parts of history we choose to celebrate and which parts we choose to forget. If this continuation of the story affected you, if Lloyd Brown's court-martial for telling the truth makes you angry, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this video, make sure these stories don't stay hidden. Comment below. Tell us what you think about how we remember World War II. Tell us what stories from your own family or community never made it into the official histories. Tell us how we can do better at facing uncomfortable truths. Because Lloyd Brown and Isaac Woodard and James Baldwin and thousands of others deserve better than silence. They deserve better than being footnotes in academic papers. They deserve to be remembered as fully as the men we call heroes. Even when, especially when, their stories make us uncomfortable. This was America. This is history. And we're still deciding what to do with it.